Buongiorno a tutti, continuiamo allora il convegno dedicato, come sapete, oggi, come avevamo introdotto i lavori stamattina, alla parte più giuridica, una parte che riguarda i nuovi orizzonti della gestione della crisi dell'impresa, con particolare riferimento anche alla contendibilità dell'impresa in crisi da parte di competitor, di fondi di investimento e soprattutto utilizzando e naturalmente analizzando anche quelle che sono le novità normative che il legislatore italiano quest'estate ha emesso e con un'attenzione particolare anche dove si andrà probabilmente, speriamo di qui a breve, nella logica diciamo così della riforma dell'intera materia della ristrutturazione delle imprese in crisi. Dico solo un breve cenno, come accennavo stamattina, saluto il professor Gino Cavalli che insieme a Luciano Panzani ormai da 22 anni, so azzeccato adesso gli anni, organizza ad Alba un convegno importante che è un po' una pietra miliare nell'ambito dei convegni sulle procedure concorsuali, dove verranno approfonditi i temi e gli spunti che oggi emergeranno. Il convegno è il 21 di novembre, ci fa piacere questo rapporto perché, mi permetto di dire, è un gemellaggio culturale, no? Con cui ogni anno ci confrontiamo per capire quali possono essere le tematiche di interesse per gli imprenditori, per i professionisti, per gli stessi magistrati, per le banche e naturalmente moduliamo i nostri convegni proprio per cercare di dare delle risposte o degli spunti di riflessione relativamente a questi temi. La prima relazione, la relazione di apertura è del Presidente della Bench Deputy Court di New York, Cecilia Morris, che ringrazio per la sua naturalmente partecipazione. È presa da tanti impegni, so, se mi posso permettere, che già lunedì deve essere a Lancitral per un incontro molto importante su tematiche che riguardano l'insolvenza. Lei ci parlerà un po' del progetto di riforma del Chapter 11 e della vendita di asset e di quello insomma che sta facendo il legislatore americano, che dovrà fare il legislatore americano. Voi sapete che le nuove normative, non solo italiane, ma anche di altri paesi, si sono ispirati o comunque hanno tenuto presente quella che è la normativa fallimentare americana, a volte nel bene, a volte nel male, perché partiamo con delle strutture anche organizzative o con delle mentalità e dei tipi di approccio che necessariamente sono diversi e quindi i risultati non sono sempre stati positivi, ma certamente costituiscono un modello di riferimento su cui fare queste riflessioni. Quindi lascerei la parola a Cecilia Morris ringraziandola per aver partecipato al nostro convegno.
Buongiorno, grazie professor Tullio. Modena è la meravigliosa gente che io contro che mi fanno davvero sentire come a casa.
Abbiamo la promessa da Cecilia che il prossimo anno farà tutta la relazione in italiano, si sta totalmente inventando e per cui la ringraziamo.
Buona, grazie. The topic of today's conference is change, innovation. And Mr. G.R.O. this morning mentioned the appetite for failure in the United States. So how to meet the business challenges means reassessing insolvency laws within the legal framework of market conditions. The bankruptcy laws of the United States have evolved since the late 1800s. And today we're going to discuss a commissioned report based on a 3-year study for business reorganizations only. The American Bankruptcy Institute is the United States' largest association of bankruptcy professionals. It is made up of over 12,000 members, including attorneys, auctioneers, bankers, judges, accountants, professors, turnaround specialists, and anyone else within the bankruptcy professional arena. Founded in 1982, the American Bankruptcy Institute plays a leading role in providing congressional leaders and general public with a nonpartisan reporting and analysis of the bankruptcy regulations, laws, and trends. The ABI commissioned a group of highly respected business professionals to prepare and publish potential changes to the bankruptcy laws concerning business, and might I add, big business. The first and probably the most dear to the insolvency professionals was professional fees. Professional fees are the subject of media reports and headlines when discussing bankruptcy and its cost. For instance, the Lehman bankruptcy, many of you are familiar with the Lehman bankruptcy, had professional fees of over 1.1, and that 0.1 means 100 million, $1.1 billion. Interesting, 1.1 billion. But it was holding 600 billion in assets when it filed bankruptcy. So in comparison to what was saved and returned to the creditors, 1.1 does not seem like a huge fee. The Commission reviewed the high fees of professionals in these Chapter 11s, and it admitted that the high cost of professionals' fees in the small and medium-sized cases encourages quick sales of the bankruptcy instead of reorganization. They found no answer to the problem. Other of the Commission's findings did lend themselves to fixes. One is in the secured financing. The report recommends stopping the practice of securing pre-bankruptcy debt with post-bankruptcy assets. That's known as cross-collateralization. Current bankruptcy law requires making adequate protection payments to secured lenders to insulate them from the decline in the value of their collateral, and the Commission believes that such payments should be based on the foreclosure value of the collateral, not the going concern value. Big difference. And of course, a lot less cost to the insolvency in the bankruptcy. And what they're wanting is a genuine reorganization, because that leads us to the next recommendations, and that is sales. Major corporate bankruptcies are often completed, for all practical purposes, within 6 weeks by selling the business without a plan of reorganization. And sometimes the senior secured lenders buy the business in exchange for debt, leaving the junior or the lesser creditors with nothing or almost nothing. The report recommends changing the laws and procedures governing the sale and plan approval to ensure that companies aren't sold in the insolvency proceeding at artificially low values. In addition to barring sales within the first 60 days of the bankruptcy, the Commission recommends that an entire company shouldn't be sold without satisfaction of a plan confirmation requirements. Within the bankruptcy code right now, there are 29 statutes that say what you have to do for confirmation, and they think that should be included, and that all should include good faith and disclosure of payments and fees. The Commission also proposed an elaborate set of rules to ensure that some creditors are not injured by allowing that low selling price because of the unusually fast sale of the debtor's property. What the commission developed, and this may be a little formal, but it's the redemption value option to account for the possibility that the company's worth could rise within 3 years. So if the company's value does increase, the secured creditors would be paid in full. A plan of reorganization or sale could be approved, and this would be over the objection of a creditor class if that class is given the ability to make that redemption option within the 3 years. Ordinarily, ownership, the stockholders, the shares of stock in the debtor, is wiped out in a bankruptcy. The commission would ask for the codification of what's called the new value exception. The new value exception allows shareholders to retain ownership in the debtor if they contribute value reasonably proportionate to the ownership interest they keep. All of these are new and different within the code. One of the other important trends is something that occurred in 2005. In 2005, the United States Congress, and all of the bankruptcy laws have to be passed by Congress, made a major change in bankruptcy law by requiring the assumption or rejection of a real estate lease within 7 months. That change caused more liquidations early in a bankruptcy case. The commission recommended allowing a full year to decide whether to assume or reject a real estate lease. The commission also recommended that the code be amended so the right to use a trademark continues even if a license is rejected as a contract, as an executory contract. In other words, it hasn't been fulfilled. Another part of the U.S. law has historically allowed a debtor in bankruptcy to recover payments to a creditor that occurred within the 90 days preceding the bankruptcy filing. These are known as preferences. Preference law was intended to put all creditors on equal footing, so a supplier who has leverage to force payment of a debt before bankruptcy comes out no better than other suppliers who were not paid. The commission said there's evidence that preference actions often do not benefit all the creditors of the bankruptcy. Rather, preferences are considered as a big, emotionally as well as fiscal problem for creditors because it means 2 losses. The creditor first sustains a loss when the company owing the debt files bankruptcy, and as many as 2 years later, the creditor faces a second loss when a bankruptcy trustee demands the returnment of payments within 3 months of the bankruptcy filing. Sometimes the recovery only benefits the secured lenders and are used to pay simple administrative expenses, or they don't go to the debtor creditors. The commission also recommends that the statute be modified to require the trustee to conduct reasonable due diligence before demanding return of the preference, including laying out the elements of the preference actions with particularity and also what might be the defenses. And that leads into one of the other problems, and that's fraudulent transfers. Current law allows a trustee to sue to recover transfers within 2 years of the bankruptcy filing made with actual intent to hinder, delay, or defraud creditors. The commission would expand this ability to permit suits to recover transfers going back to as long as 6 years before the bankruptcy. This comes out of a case in New York that you might have heard of, the Bernie Madoff securities case. The trustee in that case would have been able to maintain lawsuits sufficient to repay the entire $17 billion loss to the investors. It was a Ponzi scheme. And for you unfamiliar with Ponzi schemes, it's a fraudulent investment where the operator, in this case, Bernie Madoff, paid returns to the investors from new capital by the investors rather than from profits earned. So the Commission recommended changes in order to permit recovery of fraudulent transfers from those parties who receive payment from the party that initially received that transfer. The commissioners would change the current law so the final recipient could also be sued at the beginning of the case without awaiting for judgment from the initial recipient. In the liquidation of Madoff, the district court judge, not the bankruptcy judge, but the appellate judge, barred the trustee from suing a foreign recipient of a fraudulent transfer where the initial recipient was also foreign. So the ABI Commission would modify the law to permit recovery of payments entirely outside the United States as long as the court considers the legal principles of international comity. In other words, recognizes the law where the fraudulent transferee is venued. Another issue that was very important, the report found that labor unions and workers needed more protection on the modification of the collective bargaining agreements. Some courts don't give workers any claims at all if a union contract is modified. The Commission would allow unsecured claims for the individual workers. Another one is, and again this comes out of Madoff, in para delicto, and that's Latin for in equal fault. And it is a centuries-old judge-made law that bars one wrongdoer from suing another. Because the bankruptcy trustees are viewed as stepping into the shoes of the debtor that committed the fraud, they are viewed as equally corrupt and cannot sue others for the same wrongdoing. So the victims in the Madoff scheme might have recovered all of the losses had this proposal been law. Unfortunately, the legal doctrine known as in para delicto prevented the trustee from suing banks and others allegedly complicit in the swindle. In its report, the Commission recommended amending the law to allow bankruptcy trustees to bring these cases. One of the other changes is very important in bankruptcy law now. Under the current law, half of the creditors by number and 2/3 in dollar amount in each class of claims must vote yes for a plan to be accepted by that class of claims. The Commission advocated doing away with this fundamental feature of the code. Instead, the Commission recommends that a company should be able to emerge from bankruptcy even when all creditor classes vote against the plan. And that's to avoid delay, cost, gamemanship, and value destruction. The Commission endorsed changing current law so an accepting class is a prerequisite for cram down. On voting, the Commission advocated another significant change by endorsing one creditor, one vote rule. This means that a creditor can only have one vote no matter the number of claims and regardless of whether a claim is divided into smaller portions and sold to others. Interestingly, 85 to 90% of companies filing in Chapter 11 a bankruptcy reorganization, have $10 million or less in assets. These are referred to small or medium-sized enterprises. The report explains how existing Chapter 11 law, designed with large companies in mind and was only comprehensively overhauled in 1978, is too slow, too costly, and not working for small and medium-sized enterprises. And that dissuades them from even attempting a reorganization. So the Commission recommended ways to make Chapter 11 simpler and less costly for small and medium-sized enterprises while providing them tools for a reorganization. Important to these enterprises is what's called the absolute priority rule, which prevents shareholders from retaining their ownership interest in the company. This doesn't work well with small enterprises, and we heard about that this morning. They are almost all family-owned because there's usually only one shareholder who is the individual plumber, mechanic, grocery store owner, and losing ownership in the company defeats the purpose of reorganizing. The Commission proposes allowing existing shareholders to retain ownership as long as creditors are paid in full within 4 years of the company's emergence from Chapter 11. If all creditor classes vote for a plan, existing shareholders can retain their stock. I have just outlined some of the major recommendations in an approximately 400-page study. While some of the suggestions can be implemented by judicial mandate, judges can rule on these, most must be part of congressional legislation. If any of you have been watching any U.S. news, you will know that the United States Congress has not been very cooperative with each other, much less in passing a bankruptcy reform. So it will be of interest to see what happens. When Professor Tullio asked me to speak on the changes, I replied, I usually don't even read them until Congress has passed them, because what goes in does not necessarily come out. So, grazie mille. It's wonderful to be here. This is the report.